Welcome to another edition of the Sport Media Professionals Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Springer. On today's episode, I'm joined by Jack Kreuzer. He's a play-by-play broadcaster in New York. And in this episode, Jack will talk about someone who inspired him to get into broadcasting, how he's kind of shuffled between broadcasting and work-life balance, and more. That's upcoming on this episode. Thanks for watching. Jack, thank you so much for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you on. How are you doing so far?
So good, so good. No, thanks for having me here.
Yeah, pleasure to have you on. Why don't you just start off? I'll just ask you, just tell me a little bit about what you're doing right now, and kind of what your role is and what your day-to-day life looks like right now.
Yeah, so I am a play-by-play announcer by night, you should say. Work a bunch of jobs just to survive, but currently I'm at DeUville University, which is a Division II college in Buffalo, New York, and I do their play-by-play for basically all their sports, fall through spring. I've dabbled into some high school sports as well in Western New York, covering high school hockey, basketball, and football, just to get more gigs. And outside of that, I've touched a little in Niagara University D1 basketball. Got the opportunity to go up there this year, but that's all I'm doing so far during the day. Believe it or not, I sell cars, so that's that's how I pay the bills, and it makes my car payment cheaper. So we can't complain about that.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's exciting. Hey, of all the sports you've done, what's your favorite? What sport do you like to cover the most?
Definitely hockey. I grew up watching the Buffalo Sabres and Hall of Famer Rick Jeanneret call games for my whole life basically. So he's really the reason why I got into broadcasting, was listening to RJ on the radio and eventually on the TV as well. I actually got a chance to meet him when I was 11, and he took me into the press box before a game, put me on, the headset. I got to hear myself on the mic, whatever. For an 11-year-old, that's a huge deal. And,
Yeah, yeah,
to meet him and to see him and to see how real the job was, it kind of showed me that, okay, this is a career. Like, this is what a human being is doing for money yearly, and they get to do that. So, it kind of opened my eyes to that. But ever since, if hockey's my number one sport, obviously no hate on the Bills or anything, but they were bad for a majority of my life. So the Sabres definitely grabbed me first.
yeah. How'd you feel about the whole Jack Eichel situation then, leaving Buffalo, going to Las Vegas? Thoughts on that, just quickly?
Yeah, well, I let's just say I was at his return to Buffalo a couple weeks ago, and I was definitely letting the booze rain down on him for sure.
Yeah. So I was actually going to ask you about you talked about that moment when you were 11 and you went and had that opportunity. Was that kind of like I mean, I know you're only 11 at the time, but was that kind of one of those moments where you're like, hey, this is something that maybe I want to do for my career? I mean, obviously at a younger age, but was that kind of one of those moments where you were like, wow, this is something I can do with my life too?
Yeah, at that point, I hadn't really thought about doing it. Actually, my family members would call me the play-by-play voice of our card games, growing up, with my grandma and my aunts and stuff. But up until then, obviously I was 11, I hadn't done any play-by-play or anything like that. But it was that next year after Rick actually, here, I don't know if you can use this, but he gave me this signed puck and
Oh
wrote
man.
"Best of luck, Jack" on it. And so
Wow.
I've had this up on my TV stand for basically since I got it, just as a reminder, no, that is possible. The people that are doing it see you and they believe in you, and it's just kind of that belief that brought me into the next year of my life. At age 12, I went to the athletic director at my high school, um, and I asked to do public address for the modified football games. So we're talking the lowest level you can go. But from there, it all started to build up for me, and I've been lucky enough to get gigs pop up, since then. But definitely meeting Rick and seeing the studio and seeing the equipment and being in that position, I think was the most valuable part of my childhood, because that showed me this is a viable career path, and it showed me that this is fun. Like, you get to show up to a hockey rink every time the boys play and talk about him. And by the way, someone's going to pay for it. You can't
Yeah.
ask for anything more. That's awesome.
Were there any other broadcasters that sort of inspired you or that you kind of looked up to as part of when you decided you wanted to start pursuing broadcasting?
I can't say there's one name outside of like Rick Jenneret. I'd say there's not one person that pulled me in. Obviously, all I do is watch sports away from the mic. So, when I turn on ESPN and I hear an Ian Eagle or like a Kevin Harlan. I'm a huge Kevin Harlan guy. I think he is so fantastic at what he does. I feel like I didn't necessarily understand up until very recently, up until joining STAA, that I didn't understand the background part of the games. I just saw what the production was and I enjoyed the production, but I didn't understand how people were good at it or what made certain broadcasters better than others. But since joining STAA, I've realized it's the storytelling. It's not only the voice, but it's what they're saying and how they say it and how they talk to the people they're with. So it's really just in this past year that I've been able to kind of dissect each game that I've watched from a production standpoint and hear people like, Ian Eagle, Noah Eagle, even, and really appreciate their craft and appreciate what they're able to do. And it opens the doors to, really, I think, enjoying the sport even more, enjoying the business of sports even more.
Yeah, I think you touched on it for sure. Is that for casual fans or fans of the game, you only see the finished product. You don't really get a full understanding of what goes in behind the scenes, or how much time and effort it takes to get that cohesion with you if you have a broadcast partner, what have you. So, do you feel like you've kind of started to understand that more over the past year or so, a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I just started doing the play by play side of things a year ago in January. So I started with a color commentator, and we had never met before. We showed up at the game and we did the show, and it was fun. Luckily, he was like in my age range and kind of understood the vibe of Division II basketball. He knew the game, so that was easy and fun. James Burns is his name. James, if you're listening, thanks for being a great color commentator. But from there, I've done so much work by myself, especially at DUville this past Scholastic season, where I don't get to use a color commentator in the broadcast at all. I'm just all by myself. So since getting the opportunity to go to Niagara and work with pros, work with people like Todd Callan and Pat Malacaro and Sue Rorick at Niagara, they've showed me what it's like as a professional, what a script is supposed to look like, what it's supposed to sound like during the intermission, how you're supposed to space things out during the pace of the game. So it's those little tidbits, and obviously everyone calls a game differently. When I work a game with Todd, I know his pacing is very different than Pat's and Sue's, and
Yeah.
it's all fitting the vibe. I think if you can feel out a conversation with someone, I feel like you can be a decent color commentator or even play-by-play person.
Yeah, and sports is obviously something it's not a 9 to 5. You know what I mean? The hours are usually crazy and wacky. You mentioned that you actually are a used car salesman. Kind of, how do you pursue this? How do you pursue this career while also keeping a work life balance, or balancing your personal life as well?
Yeah, well, I'm lucky. My day job at the car dealership is they're super understanding with what my goal is and what my passions are. They're super flexible with my schedule. So even like today, I should be working right now, but instead I've got a doubleheader softball game at 1 o'clock Eastern. So I've, told them I'm going to be off this day, this day. They're super flexible with it. So it makes my life a lot easier not to have to stress about that. Having people in my corner at work that, understand what I'm trying to do here, it makes it a lot easier. So it's not too big of a stress, but there are times where definitely you're like, okay, I just want to do this sports thing full time, and like, when is that full time job going to come and all that. But, enjoying it in the moment and appreciating the people that are supporting me at that other job that then go home and they'll tune into a game I'm calling, that means the world.
Yeah. So after you had that experience when you were younger, kind of you jumped into it when you said you were 12 years old. Was there ever a moment beyond that where you really became like, yes, this is like where I want to be or what I want to do even further long term?
That's tough. I feel like there's been so many moments, Nick, where over the years I've been at games and part of my like pregame ritual, if you will, is I'll just sit in the moment and look around and like feel the crowd, feel the environment, and just appreciate it all. The fact that we get to do this, the fact that I get to sit behind a microphone and talk about a game that's being played, be it high schoolers or college players or professional athletes. It's lucky that we're able to do it, that we get to do it. And I feel like it's the culmination of all of those moments before each and every game that has led me to think this is something I want to do full time. But I will say, if there is one moment, it was the first varsity football game I got to call on public address. I was a freshman, I think. I might have been in eighth grade. One of the two. I was very young, and there is no reason why a 13 or 14-year-old should be on a microphone in front of hundreds of people at a sporting event. But, lucky enough, I got to do it, and the game was exciting. My football team at the time in high school was very good, so it was enjoyable to watch and to call. I had a lot of fun with it. Don't find that tape anywhere. It is garbage. But I feel like that first varsity game that I got to call really solidified my, yeah, this is what I want to do.
So now that you've kind of been in it for a little bit, you've done some play. I mean, what do you think are the most important attributes of someone who is trying to pursue a career in play or sports media in general?
Yeah, I'd say you have to be in love with storytelling. You have to want to tell the stories of the players involved, of the coaches involved, of, if you'd put it in storybook terms, you have to know the plot, you have to know the subplots, you have to know the main characters, and you have to enjoy telling those stories and enjoy sprinkling little tidbits in about each character and about each subplot in throughout the game, bringing your audience in and not forcing it and just letting the play happen and telling the story as it unfolds. I think that's one of the best parts about sports broadcasting is it's improv every game. There's not one pre-written script, and you can do all your prep work that you want, but you have no idea what's going to happen from puck drop or kickoff to the end of the game. You just have to roll with it. So I think you have to have a love for the storytelling, but also you just have to be a good person. You have to work with the people that you're with and enjoy your time with them. And even if you don't, bite your tongue and get through the night. I've had to do that plenty of times in my day where you're working with someone that doesn't necessarily want to be there, and you just got to say, well, here we are. Let's put it all aside. Let's have a good game, and let's give the audience and the players involved and everyone involved the broadcast they deserve. But I think as long as you're, a nice person and you're easy to work with, no matter who you're working with, from the camera operator to the person checking tickets at the gate to your producer to your color commentator, if you're just nice to all of them, you don't have to worry about what impression did I make, who did I offend, like what did I do. As long as you're just genuinely nice and yourself, I think everything will fall into place.
So far in your career, what's been the best moment that you've witnessed as a broadcaster? What's been the most exciting moment you've witnessed?
Well, outside of like personally for like my own teams that I've gotten to call, I've worked for a lot of teams that have had difficult seasons, we'll say. I just called my first DUville basketball victory this year. After, at home at least. The problem is these teams love to do it, Nick, when they're on the road, so I don't get to call their wins.
I
But
understand.
honestly, yeah, the best moment I'd say that I've gotten to call was actually just a couple weeks ago. I got a chance to work the New York State High School Hockey Championships. And, outside Minnesota and Massachusetts, I think New York State has some of the best hockey in the country, from Long Island to Buffalo. So they were held in Buffalo, in downtown Buffalo, and I got to call play-by-play for the Division 2 championship game, and it was a 7-6 overtime win. There were 6 lead changes. These were the best teams in the state. One of them was from Western New York, so they had a massive fan base. The other from New York City. They made the long drive, 7 hours to Buffalo, and it was an electric environment. And getting to, like I said, getting to tell that story was unbelievable, and I'm lucky to be there for that.
If you could go back and sort of tell 11-year-old you what you just told me just now about that game, would he believe you? I mean, what do you think 11-year-old you would say to something like that? That you were doing, these crazy high school broadcasts.
Yeah, I think he. Wow. I mean, wow, that's you're gonna make me cry, Nick. That's he he'd be very proud. He'd be very proud, but he'd also be like, okay, then what? What's next? Because I feel like that's always what I've thought since I was a child to even now is like, okay, that's a great step. Now what? How can we get better? How can we improve? What did you learn from that game that will help your next broadcast get better? And, I'm still asking myself those same questions now. But 11-year-old me would definitely be impressed and proud and probably very thankful that my voice ended up dropping as low as it did.
What do you think is next for you? Where do you see yourself going in the near future? I mean, what's your end goal? What do you think?
Boy, that's a really good question. I'm not
I
sure.
know, sometimes you don't know the
Yeah,
answer to those questions.
I'm sure. I mean, you get it. Graduating in May, trying to find that next gig, it's tough. It's a difficult industry to plan ahead for, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Um, so I've kept my options open. Thankfully, I just met John and Amy and Michael at STAA. Just in February, I got a membership there. So they've been helping me kind of find my way and put things together to start sending out for employers. But as of right now, my plan is to be back in Buffalo next year for the school season and the sports seasons. Excuse me. And if I can be at Deauville and Niagara while sprinkling in some high school games, I'm all for it. My goal is to hang up the car salesman shoes, and to return my keys, if you will, to those cars as soon as possible. But I know that's not as you know viable and likely as one may want it to be.
Yeah,
So that's the goal. The goal is sign an Al Michaels $30 million a year contract, right? That's
that's true. Yeah,
that's
that's
the
true.
end goal. But
That's true.
as far as the short term, just get another opportunity to announce a game. One game at a time, not thinking too far ahead. Just let me call a game and let me make it better than my last.
Yeah. Do you feel like just getting that extra experience, each and every game? Do you see yourself getting better, every game that you're doing along the way?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, there's definitely games and sports where I'll feel like I had a down performance and I'll come home and I'll try not to hang my head, but it's like, okay, you got to shake off a bad day where you maybe had a couple flubs, maybe you messed up a name once or twice, which, is what you hate to do, but you shake it off and you say, okay, how can I not let that happen again? And
Yeah.
from there I go home and I'll tweak my prep sheet, or I'll go ask a coach, hey, what happened here? And I'll try to just learn more about the situation. Talk to my producer, hey, in that situation, are we throwing the break or are we staying here? Or should we talk about this or should we not talk about this? It's kind of finding those lines. And I don't have like a college experience of broadcasting to lean back onto. So I've had to learn a lot of these things on the fly. And with crews like at Western New York Athletics, who runs the high school sports broadcast that I do here, it's a three-man broadcast. There's a producer, there's a cameraman, and then there's me. Or there's a color commentator as well, 3 to 4 people. And the fact that it's so low budget and it's so, you know, at the beginning stages of a large production company, all of us are learning something new every game. And so when I got the chance to go to ESPN with Niagara and see, okay, here's a rundown and here's a game script and here's what breaks are going to look like and here are the graphics we're going to use, I took all that information and I just gave it to the people at Western New York Athletics. Like, this is the next level. So it's getting those experiences at the next levels that has improved my game down below. I almost consider myself like a minor league player that got called up to the big leagues for a couple games this season. I got to see the pace of play, I got to work with professionals, and now I'm back in the minors and I want to be the best minor league broadcaster there is. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, do you feel like you're getting there though? Do you feel like you're maybe reaching closer to the major leagues at some point?
Yeah, I think so. It wasn't until like a month ago when I joined STAA when I realized, okay, there's a lot more for me to learn, and I need to hone in on this, this, and this. And listening to John Chalesnik break down other people's demos and reels on a podcast that he does monthly, where I'm taking notes and going, oh, okay, talking bullet points. Okay, TV do this, radio do this. I'm learning things month by month as he puts those out with the things that he has to say that I almost don't get enough chances. I wish I would have joined in September or October because now it's going into the dead season where I work public address for baseball and softball, so I don't do play
Yeah.
by play for that. So I don't have the opportunity to use those things until next fall or, my next broadcast. So, I think I'm definitely learning, but I think we'll see come the fall where I'm at and what I need to work on then because there's always going to be something that's okay, let's tweak that. Let's just
Yeah.
improve that a tiny
Yeah.
bit. But there's
And,
definitely there is improvement.
yeah, yeah. In my experience, it's always you do a game and it's like in your head, you're like, man, that was really bad. And then you go back and it's never as bad as you think it is. And then
Mm.
also, if you do a game, you're like, man, I really nailed that. And then like it's never quite as good as you think it is either. You know what I mean? Like in the moment, you're like, it's a roller coaster one way or the other, but it's always never like as bad or as good as you think it is. Which, is on one hand is great. On the other hand, it's like, okay, these are areas where I can get better.
Do you hate putting together your reel as much as I do?
Oh yeah,
Just
for
going
sure.
back and watching that film, it's excruciating, especially when you say those good games where you're like, "Oh, it was a win. There was this awesome moment and there were all these great things I said." And then you watch and you're like, "Dude, that's not a sentence." Or like, "What is that? Like what is going on here?" There's 15 seconds of dead air, but yeah, I feel like there's always, pros and cons to every broadcast that like an athlete, you can't get too high and you can't get too low on them.
Yeah, yeah, and like for me, I feel like I'm a bit of a perfectionist. So I'll listen to a 5 minute segment, and there will be like 10 seconds where it wasn't that great, and I'm like, man, that's a terrible reel all of a sudden now because
Yeah.
10 seconds are bad. So I feel like for a lot of people, for a lot of broadcasters, maybe you feel similarly. Sometimes you can be your own worst critic. You know what I mean? Which on one hand, it's a good thing. You always want to critique yourself, but sometimes it's easy to get more down on yourself and sometimes maybe you need an outside perspective to say, hey, that was a great segment besides that little 10 second, but the rest of it was fantastic.
Hmm. And employers aren't going to be that critical either. Like at
Yeah,
least
yeah,
from what people say is they're not going to be as hard on you as you are. They don't know you. They don't know who you are or how big of a perfectionist you are. But sometimes that'll come across in a broadcast too where you don't want to be too rigid where you're like I can't mess up. You just got to be yourself.
yeah, yeah. And sometimes the mess up moments even make for, interesting or funny or unique moments that kind of add some flavor to a broadcast.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Jack, hey, thank you so much for being on. Hope you enjoyed it. It was an absolute pleasure. Best of luck to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.